Okay, today I wanted to talk about how to download a WordPress site, a full WordPress site, to the point that you can take it and move it and have it completely offline, and a year from now restore it on a separate host. I mean, how can you download all the files, and what really are all the files? To do that, there's a number of reasons you might want to. First would just be generally to have backups of websites. There are a lot of hosts out there that do automatic backups for you. Um, and there's a lot of plugins in WordPress that are backup plugins that'll also do things like daily backups automatically. Uh, they're good, and I would always use those tools, but I like to do manual backups as well, because sometimes what happens with hosts is they'll back up the most recent version of the site and then delete everything before that, or they'll back up the last 3 weeks worth and then delete everything before that. But sometimes what happens with certain malware is if it gets injected in your site, it might lay dormant for a while, and you might have an infected site that looks completely fine that keeps getting backed up, and it isn't until some trigger, I don't know, maybe it's a date, or I don't know, um, makes that malware actually manifest, where it manipulates your password and starts showing spam on your website. And then you revert back in time, and then it just happens again a month later. So those things exist. I mean, they're not that common. I remember seeing a whole lot of them, especially when I was working with like Joomla and earlier versions of WordPress. But I mean, they're still out there. If I'm going to do backups for somebody, I like to do them manually to make sure that I'm not reliant 100% on um, a service that might get rid of older versions that are a month or two old. I mean, you want to have kind of a history of your backups. The other reason you might want to download a site beyond backups, though, is if you want to move it from one host to another. Let's say you want to move from GoDaddy to HostGator, or you want to move from um, Rackspace to Bluehost, or whatever it is. Uh, and that happens a lot, especially when like a new coder takes over a site, or when you want to start like unify your billing. Like sometimes what people do is they buy, and this happens all the time. People buy like domain names willy-nilly. They just type in, "Oh, I want this domain name," before they have a website, and they'll buy it like cheapdomainnames.com or some random site. They'll buy the domain name, and then later they're gonna, "Oh, I want to build this site." Well, they don't want cheap domain names to be the place that hosts the site. Maybe they do, but probably not. They want to use something more reputable. So they end up purchasing hosting through a totally different company. And then you have this scenario where your domain is on one company and your host is on the other, and it works, but you have two different people billing you, and it's like if you have two different insurance companies billing for your house and for your car, like you're just going to get a better deal, and things are going to work better if you have one company billing for both. So when I meet customers who are in that scenario, if I can't move their domain from one company to another, which is sometimes kind of a pain, um, and maybe the company where the domain is at is actually a better host, then what I'll want to do is do a backup of the website and re-upload it to the other host. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. Those are the two scenarios. Um, I got all my apps open, so you didn't see me typing in passwords. So WordPress site comes in two pieces. They have the files, all of the files that are in that zip when you download WordPress, and then there's the database, which is basically also a bunch of files, but instead of something you can download, it's something that's permanently uh, running as a service on your host. So you can basically go to a database and download all, like a dump is what we call, of all the information in that database, and it basically saves as a file that's kind of like a recipe for recreating that database elsewhere. And you can use that recipe on any host that uses databases, which is required for WordPress. So anywhere WordPress is supported, you can export a database and import it on the new host. So all the files and the database dump is everything you need to recreate a WordPress site and to back up a WordPress site. So I'm logging into a WordPress site that I have built for a customer. It's called Godsholes. They make turkey bacon. This is one of their websites. I have a deal with these guys where I take care of their sites. I do backups. I update their plugins. I make sure there's not any malware. If there's any problems with plugins conflicting, I resolve them. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but for the purposes of this, I just want to show you the process I go through every couple weeks of downloading the site manually, because that's part of our package. So I'm logging into FileZilla, which is what I use to FTP and get access to their files. And then I'm just going to select all of their files in here. I just hit Control A. I don't need this WP private. You can download it. There's no problem. I just know I don't need it because that's like a folder that comes with the host. It's not actually WordPress specific. You don't need to know that. Download everything if you're unsure. But here's all the files, and I'm just going to click and drag them to my local machine and put them right here in Godsholes food service folder. Let me show you that folder real quick. So here are all the backups I do, and I keep them around for a while. And I have some even older ones that I keep on Dropbox and an external hard drive. And this is just for Godsholes, some K9 Academy, another couple sites that I back up regularly. And I keep this big folder of all these sites that I'm working on with a special folder within it just for these maintenance packages. So it's November 17th, and so I'm putting everything in that folder. I know the site's pretty big, so I'm just going to let that download for a while. Okay, so that's half the equation. The other half is got to get that database. Got to dump that database. So this is the host that the site runs off. It's called my WP Engine, which is a perfectly good WordPress host. I like it because it lets you create staging sites for your WordPress site pretty easily with like a single click. So if you want to make significant changes to your site without people being able to see you while you're working on those, just create a copy of the site called a staging site, make your changes there, and then you can just, once you're happy with them, push them live, and basically it copies over your live site. So they make that really easy. There's a lot of hosts that do that now, though. I think GoDaddy started doing that last year. Like WordPress is really taken off, and so all of these web hosting companies are starting to have these WordPress specific plans that help you manage WordPress and things like that. So I'm going to go to what's called PHP My Admin, and I haven't worked on a host in a while that doesn't have PHP My Admin, and it's basically your database viewer. Okay. Sometimes if you have cPanel, you definitely should have it. You notice how I clicked it, it just took me right in. That's great, I'm glad it did, but a lot of times it'll prompt you for a login and password for your database. And just in case you don't know how to get that, your login and your password, I'm not going to show you mine for this site, but if you start downloading the site in FTP, the login and password is in one of those files. It's in the WP config file. Open that up. It says database name and database password. Copy that into this window on this screen, and it'll take you exactly to a screen like this. Okay, so there's only one database, which makes sense. There might be two databases. If I had a staging site, basically a copy of this site, you'll probably see two databases in here, but since I don't for this site, it's just the one. This is what I'm going to make a dump of. You see there's a lot of plugins, that's why I have so many tables. So I'm looking at the database here. And I just want to go ahead and click the export button. And I'm just going to hit go. And what this is, again, going to do, it should only take a minute, is download all of the database information about your site. Like when you code in WordPress, everything you type in an actual page is stored in the database. It's not stored in the files. And that's why you can like select different themes and they apply without messing things up. It's because WordPress keeps the design files and the content in two separate locations. Content is in the database, design files and things like that are in the actual files. If you're building a template, you would make that in the actual files. Okay, there it is. It downloaded. Got it. copying it out of here. All right, and then I'm going to put that in, put it in the parent directory. Just paste it in there. Done. So as soon as this thing is finished downloading, I have a full backup. And what I could do, and I can even do it now, is log in to the admin for the site. I want to run a little slow because I'm filming this video. Log into the admin of the site and go ahead and update all my plugins. So I got a couple updates and a couple plugins, but yeah, for the most part, I could probably update these now. They're just database changes, but that's outside the scope of this. I'll wait till this thing finishes. All right. So let me go back to talk about the maintenance package, because I think people are interested in how you charge for these sorts of things, or just people are getting into web development, like what's a good pricing model. So I really only charge for 3 different kind of services. One is just hourly troubleshooting and fixing website stuff, like, hey Zach, I'm getting this weird error on my website, can you come fix it? Sure, it's I do $65 an hour, but you're flexible, you know. Depends on the customer. And 2 is I actually build sites from scratch, and for those I build proposals. Here's what it's going to look like, how many pages. We have that conversation with the customer. And 3, I do these maintenance packages where once the site's out and live and looking good, you can hire me to keep it looking good and maybe include something like an hour of work per month. So these are kind of like a retainer. And so a couple things that I include in those packages. Sometimes I include hosting. I don't love that because I don't love being the middleman for those sorts of things, but sometimes it makes sense. But for just the maintenance package that's on top of the hosting, they're paying a separate company for hosting. I'm just coming in and making sure the website's up to date. I'll do things like this: daily automatic backups, which frankly I'm not doing. That's coming from the host. I'm just including it in the list of services so they know it's being done. I'm not actually charging for that, but just letting them know like what they can expect. Hardening security for each WordPress site with security plugins and stuff. The bi-weekly manual backups. Yep, that's what I was just discussing. Updates to WordPress versions. They don't really happen that often. Handling any conflicts. So that's really the crux of it. So it seems pretty easy. You're just going in there and making a backup and updating all the plugins, and ideally that's all you have to do. But sometimes you'll notice like a plugin conflicts with another plugin, and all of a sudden you're having issues. I do this late at night as well, just in those sorts of scenarios that if I do have to fix an issue, I'm not doing it at a time that a lot of people are probably looking at the site. If I update it and oh, there's a conflict, I want to be able to resolve that conflict before anybody knows about it. So it does happen. It's kind of like a feast or famine sort of thing. You'll have like several months where all you do is update plugins, and then you'll have 1 month where your Facebook plugin breaks, and all of a sudden you're getting some security warning because you need to purchase an SSL because it's a new policy by your host, and all this sort of stuff. Like it happens all at once. That's just the nature of the business, and those are the nights where you make your money. So for something like this, because I've been doing it for 5 different sites, I charge a quarterly cost of $1,350. But I do a lot for these, and since there's 5 sites and I include that hour work, it seems to work out. So typically, if you're just doing kind of maintenance for like a backup for a site, just keep an eye on things. I have another person I work with who just pays $50 a month, and for that I go in there, make sure all the plugins are up to date, and take monthly backups, and just send them an email every time I do it, let them know it was okay. So all right, well, that's it. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you very much.